My name is Thina Saltevdt. I work for Nordea Bank in the Sustainable Finance Division.
Fantastic. So if you could tell us what exactly is sustainable banking that you're doing, the work that you're doing?
Sustainable banking, in my view, is I think the whole banking sector is changing in this way now. Not only banking, but finance as such. Rather than looking at short-term financial revenues, you look at revenues, of course, but also include social issues. And that is a big change going on. It didn't used to be that, and it's still, from a starting point, I would say. But we're starting to see a change there, that you actually take into account more sustainable and social values, also the climate. And I think it's various reasons for this, and that is, of course, when you think about climate, which is maybe at the top of this agenda at the moment, it is because you're seeing that the costs connected to the climate changes are starting to increase. They have increased for the last 10 years or so, and first in line within the financial sector is the insurance sector. So, of course, their claims have been rising for 10 years or so. In the rest of the financial sector, we're starting to see the changes, and it's very interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think, what the drivers of these changes? Is it largely because of the insurance and so forth, or is it how is public opinion influencing businesses' investment?
I think you have a mix who's actually influencing this. Of course, the Paris Agreement itself has influenced also the financial sector, because I think we have to admit that we were not in the front row when the Paris Agreement was made. But now afterwards, I think we could also see that finance is absolutely necessary to do the substantial shift we have to from, for example, the fossil to the green industries. And to be able to do that, I mean, you need to have finance there as well. So I think that is part of the whole thing. Of course, changes within the consumers' preferences have an impact, because when they're starting to push the banks, the financial institutions, they want to see where we place the money, how we manage the money, and who we're lending money to. Of course, we need to be much more transparent. So I think that, of course, has a big impact. And then you also see the big investors in the world. For example, BlackRock. The CEO of BlackRock had an eye-opener of a speech this January, I will say, because he was very clear that their investment in the future will not only look at the short-term revenues, but also the social revenues of their investments. The same here in Norway. We have the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. And of course, it makes an impression where the CEO is standing in the United Nations building and saying that, our investment must be built on responsible investments, and responsible values. So I think, these large corporations are starting to move, these large investment funds are starting to move. It makes an impression on the rest. So I think they set a new trend here and pushing the rest of the financial market as well.
That's wonderful. So when you say socially responsible investment, what exactly does that mean for a bank, for a financial institution?
I mean, it's a row of different values you have to look at, or factors you have to measure, which is of course complicated, yes. But we have to start somewhere. So it's everything from climate and environment is one thing. You have the social aspects, for example, child labor. You also have the corporate side, for example, equality. You have working hours, payment, water use. It's a row of different variables you have to look at. A challenge is that we have to start collecting these data now. So we as a bank, when we have to be more transparent about this, because that's what our owners, investors and the public is requiring from us in the future, we have to ask the corporations we're dealing with. So because if we are going to be transparent, I know, for example, if we look at the climate issue, a bank in itself is it's a building. You often have computers, and of course we deal with with the money flows. But I mean, the climate footprint or the sustainable footprint will also. I think the biggest issue is where actually we invest money, the money we manage, and also the companies we're lending money to, and also private people, of course. So I think when we're starting to ask for this kind of data from companies, they have to deliver it to us, so we'll be able to actually measure this. Of course, it's a push and pull. We push the companies, and they will of course put much more pressure on us, because we have to deliver the products and the services for them to move in the right direction.
And how's the response has been for businesses to move towards more sustainable, the green aspect? What are you seeing the trends there, and how businesses are responding?
I think the large corporations many of them have already started to look at this, because many of them are operating, internationally, and historically you might have had, faced a couple of problems already. So you've been forced to think about this for a while. I think the major issue is here to get the middle-sized and the smaller corporation into this way of thinking, because we basically have to rethink the whole way of doing business. And it's a major task, but I mean, it's a possible task. It's something we can do, and we just have to start now. So there is where we have to be even more supportive, is towards the medium and the smaller sized the companies and firms, because for them it's even to have enough support and workforce to be able to support these roles. In a large corporation, you can always move the personnel within different areas, but smaller corporation might not have the same opportunity and flexibility within the corporations. So it's important for us to give advice and be somebody you can talk to make this change together.
Mm-hmm. And so can you speak to short-term versus long-term in terms of planning and products, and how can the system work as a whole?
Yes, short-termism is, I think it's maybe one of the major bottlenecks here to actually make this change. Because often, investors have historically been very short-term focused. And of course, climate changes, sustainability issues are often a bit longer term than a quarter, or half a year, or a year, for example. So it's difficult to get it into the pricing models. And I think here is the issue. I think there is where we have to rethink, the way we're doing business. We have to actually put a price on climate change. We have to put a price on sustainable issues, because we have a social responsibility within the financial sector. I think our aim is to move the money where it gives the highest return, not only the financial but also the social. And the way we're doing this is actually to put a price on risk. And we have to be a bit more holistic. We have to look at risk in a broader manner. And there we have to include the risk of climate changes. You have to include the risk connected to sustainable issues. And that is what we're working with, to put this into our credit models, to our business models, to actually be able to put a price on this and move the money in the right direction. I think that would also help on the transparency. And transparency of what we're doing is important to avoid short-termism, because as I pinpointed, that climate changes and social issues are not short-term. They could start to be that, because you could have political changes, for example. You could make big shifts in the capital flows, which can come as a surprise. And the surprises we don't like that much in the financial sector. But we have to be aware of these changes. So political changes, changes in people's opinion, all these kind of changes are also part of the way we have to measure risk in the future.
And what kind of innovation are you seeing coming, where business is helping lead the way with addressing climate change? What kind of innovation are you seeing coming about?
We're seeing also, you have within the financial sector, you have a technology development going on as well, and you can see different kind of ways of structuring financing. I think cooperation is a very big issue here, because if we look at the future, to get this going now, banks and financial institutions are usually a bit afraid of taking too much technology risk, taking too much political risk. But looking at ways of cooperating with, public funding schemes, you could be able to generate more money, putting the public and the commercial interests together. In the way we're doing this, we will be able to share the risk, and also I think generate more money into into more, let's say, technology risky solutions, because we must admit that the fossil sector is more mature. The greener sectors are often more new technology coming online. It's smaller businesses, so we need to shift the money from the fossil industry to the greener industry, and in that way we could maybe share the risk in a different way. And I also think that banks, financial institutions much have to work together much more than have done before. So we could look at solutions where we could have funds. We could have funds together, different financial institutions, to look at different funding schemes for smaller corporation. So you can make a portfolio of smaller corporations funded by also a corporation or financial institutions.
So when you're talking about risk, this is an industry that is very risk averse for understandable reasons. What kind of index do you use for risk assessment, and is that changing? Because you're collaborating more, there's also cross-sector collaboration as well. So what kind of index do you use? And is that?
I think it's many indexes in use at a time, and that of course is a bit confusing. I know the European Union is working with that, and I think it's an important work as well to find a common taxonomy. Basically because you need to be more clear and it needs to be comparable. Because for our clients, they need to be able to ask us questions about how we're actually doing this kind of measurement, and to be able to also compare the different bank and financial institutions, because they have to push us to come up with the best solutions as well. So I think a common ground, a common taxonomy to be able to compare this is also something that has been in work or in progress, I will say. But it needs to be much more work in this. But also, I think it would be fascinating also if you could start to use more of the, technology here. If, for example, you could have an app on your phone comparing the risk and comparing the climate exposure, maybe the sustainable exposure of different funds, only with, a couple of, with an app, it could make it much more easy for even, private people like ourselves to be able to compare and look where you actually put your pension money, your savings. So you could yourself as well be able to move the money where you think it will be, you have the highest return in the future and the best social return in the future.
So I wanted to venture a little bit deeper here into what is this like for you personally, and then also what you're seeing, the shifts in terms of just human evolution. I mean, human evolution, how do you see human consciousness evolving with business being a driver? What's the relationship between business and the evolution of consciousness that you see happening?
I think it's important that you have, both. Of course, the financial institutions can, of course, put the pressure on private people as well, but they also put the pressure on us. For example, I think there has been some eye-openers, especially when it comes to climate. The last few years. Here in Norway, for example, you had an eye-opener. It's not really climate, it's more an environmental issue. But it was this whale who actually floated on, it was dead, and it was floating up on the shores. And when they opened the well, it was full of plastic. And usually, you want to put the blame on other people. This plastic must come from somewhere, far away from Norway. But when you start to look at the plastic, it wasn't. It was our own garbage, And that was an eye opener, because we actually, with our lifestyle, we are killing the animals. I think that was a really, wow. We have to do something about our lifestyle and the way we're doing and looking at the environment. So I think that was something. And also this summer and winter. Last winter was very, very cold. Maybe one of the coldest winter we have for a very long time. But then this summer was the complete opposite. And even this autumn, it was very warm. We haven't seen these heat waves for a long time. You have big, wildfires. And I think this, changes the people's mindset that the climate changes is not something happened 20, 30 years from now. It's actually happening now. And that puts pressure on the way we live. And I also think that we're starting to understand that, seeing that people, for example, in Fiji, you have to move your houses because the water levels are increasing. I think that's starting to affect people. people have to, you know, refugees because of the climate as well, is starting to affect people in a much broader way. So seeing it's happening now, thinking about what your children and children's children are going to do if we don't change our mindset now, I think it's starting to get a movement going, but it's too small yet. But hopefully we will be able to put the pressure and make it much bigger.
Wonderful. And is there a power in micro communities and the change that they can bring, like microfinance, for example, communities coming together and making changes in their daily lives in terms of the work that you're doing?
That is very important, that we as financial institutions don't only look at the big or large solutions, but also look at the local solutions in a way. Because often climate problems, social problems, or sustainable problems looks very, you know, global, international. It doesn't really hit you. But when you look at the local problems that can be solved, of course we need to develop solutions there as well. And of course this app I talked about, where you could actually find funding and you could see how your own fund, your own pension money, your own savings can contribute actually to move the money or capital in a more greener or more sustainable solution is one thing. But also be able to get financing for small startups. I talked to a guy from Nigeria the other day. He said he's made this little startup company. What he's done, he's made this app. And this app is made for the local community, where the shops and the restaurants can actually say that when, you know, the food, when it's going out of date, you could report it via this app. And then somebody will come and pick up that food, because it's not something wrong with the food. But it's just out of date, so people don't want to buy it. Then you collect the food and give it to, you know, the lower paid parts of the community. And it's such a good way, because first of all, you know, you could help people to get more, and it's not all kind of food, it's healthy food, so only healthy food. And in this way, you know, you stop wasting food, and you help people with lower payments to get access to more healthy food. So in these kind of ways, you know, helping these startups with financing, I think is very important. Mm-hmm. Maybe the same, with energy as well, because energy is so important to move up, you know, to increase the standard of living. I think that is maybe the most important way to actually increase the standard of living is access to electricity. What we see is that really don't always need to build this big system that requires a lot of money. They're very expensive. You could also look at small societies. I've seen some solutions that solar power producers work together with phone companies to make a solution where you could actually pay for the solar power company with using technology provided by phone companies. And it's very smart, because then you could be, a low-paid family. You could get access to electricity, and then, you know, in small steps lifting the standard of living, hopefully, and get more green and not as polluting access to or energy. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounds like there's such a dynamic between finance, business, and society, and then also government. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of variables that can come together here. Can you talk more about this overlap of finance, business, and communities, and some of the innovations that you're seeing happening, and then how government is starting to shift to match that innovation?
One thing is I find very interesting is also the circular economy and the way of thinking, because usually we think linearly. You produce a product, you use it, and then you throw it away. But in a circular economy, you actually think about from actually when you're developing the product, how can you reuse part of this product? Because we are in a world, the population is growing, hopefully this living standard is continuing to increase as well, and how are we going to face that with a limited access to resources? Mm-hmm. And I think the way of thinking about resources, that you don't have to throw it away, but think about it as a circular system, a looping system, rather than a linear system, is important to use resources in the most efficient way. That is where also the companies have to rethink the business ideas. They need help from the government. Today you could have the law system, for example, the way of writing down a product. For example, maybe you have a product that could be written down within 10 years, and after that the value of this product is zero. In a circular economy, the value of the product will not be zero. It would have a value. So we need a way to put a value on this project, because it's going back to the second-hand market. You need second-hand markets for used products, for materials, used materials. In that way, creating these loops. And this cannot be made without a cooperation between companies and the government itself. And the government could push this development faster into the economy by demanding this, by putting requiring this in their own office, and also develop the right requirements and push the law system to change as well. So I think this is also a very interesting development we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm. This is wonderful. So what you're talking about also could be a virtuous cycle. So we're going into an ecosystem, a virtuous cycle of use and reuse and value. What about when it comes to sharing resources? That's such an important thing, because there are certain countries that have resources that are being extracted to be used by other countries. How can we look at that in the rule of law, and what does that look like globally for you?
Yes, that is a big and challenging issue, because the access to commodities and energy around the world is not evenly split. And of course, it is a challenge from a sustainable point of view. Just to give you one example, and that was actually in the newspaper here today. To give you one example is that that was the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. He pinpointed that in Congo you have the minerals you use to produce electric batteries for electric cars. Of course, we see electric cars as a necessity to be able to move to a greener economy, to cut the emissions from transportation. But for Congo, it has been a challenge, because to get the minerals, to extract the minerals, there has been child labor. It has been a push on the exploitation of the communities actually sitting on these minerals. So in doing good, we could also doing something bad, in the way. So to be able to think sustainably, not only on climate, only on certain, sectors, because we want to do this right, we need to have a more holistic view on this. Because in the way of doing good, we have some side effects we might not have thought about in the first place, and of course we have to deal with these problems as well. Mm-hmm. In this country, we see that we want to produce more green wind power, for example, so put up these windmills on land to produce more green energy. And what we're doing is actually influencing the area where the reindeer is, where they have, what do you call it? Sorry.
They live. This is their grazing pasture.
Yes, exactly. So, in the way of trying to produce more green energy, we actually we're influencing the life of the reindeers, and
so thinking holistically, short term versus long term, seeing the true impact,
and the total ecological cycle as well, not only in one sector at a time.
That's quite a bit of awareness to have. I mean, starting to think about this holistic system, and then we're talking about different elements. You're talking about government, you're talking about business. And being able to have that view. Talk a little bit more about the role of the everyday person, people in society here, and their role to go from feeling overwhelmed, climate change, and how they can start participating more in partnership with business towards this kind of holistic thinking.
I think it's very important that we, as individuals as well, thinking about the small things, because sometimes you think about starting to what should we say, Just finding some examples here now. Sorry. Do you think about
So what decisions, what actions could we take every day in order to have a macro level change, and how can we partner with government?
Yeah, so
and
we
with
can
businesses?
ask questions you think about, or question the companies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my choice, so as an individual, what kind of choices can I make when I turn on the electrical light?
Yeah.
How does that affect? Right.
Sorry.
No, this is great. This is wonderful.
Okay, so in the everyday life, I think we could start to look at, what kind of transport are we using? Could we use the bus, or could we walk instead of actually using our own car? We could start to ask a question, what kind of products and services are we actually paying for? What is this product made of? What is the wrapping? If you go to the shop, if you're going to buy groceries, do we have to have groceries packed in, plastic? If we have to have put in plastic, what kind of plastic is it? When you're buying clothes, for example, where does it come from? Who's making it? Is it any child labor? We have to put a pressure on the companies. Also, we like to have people putting pressure on us as financial institutions, because I think people should be much more aware of where actually we put their pension money, where do we put the saving money. Start to ask questions, where is my money being invested? Because that could have an impact. Even though you don't have much money, all together we are many people, and then we can have a big impact. Not only, on the companies themselves, but the awareness. You're starting, the awareness in the society, and I think that is important as well, to send these signals, even if they're small. If we are many enough, it will make a change.
Wonderful. And I think we can ask you one last question, or do we have more? Because we have a lot of questions, but we don't want to take too much of your time.
I was curious just for you, you had worked in the oil industry, now you're moving in here. What has this whole transformation been like for you?
I used to work as an oil analyst, and I did that for 10 years. The last 4 years I started to look at the green transformation, because I started to get worried, and that was my personal, feeling that, starting to question what I did myself. And I started to have a look at, how is actually the fossil fuels influencing the world, influencing the climate. I've always been very interested in animals, and what is happening around animals and their ecosystems. But I haven't thought that much about climate until somebody actually pinpointed, do you actually see what is happening here?
With that pivot, you're allowing others to see it's possible. Should we continue, or
oftentimes the off-camera stuff is the
so
best.
good. Would you mind just recording?
I live in Northern California, close to where the fires were. Last year, a few miles from Santa Rosa, which was, So what is that? I mean, when you see the news with these fires and other major events, how is that impacting not only you, your colleagues?
It's scary to see that this, massive changes are coming on. You can't do anything. You feel so, you feel so
helpless.
Helpless, yeah, exactly. And but then you think you can't just sit down and watch this happening. You have to do something, and I think all of us can do something. We can. Working in the financial sector, I really feel that we could do something. We have been quiet until now, but being able to think differently, rethink the mindset and the business strategies, I think it's possible to move the capital in the way we need to avoid these kind of change or do the happenings in the future.
And so what is your view of capital? What is the purpose of it? And how do you then navigate and move through the fear of the known to the unknown when it comes to the work with the capital?
We usually want to know where we're investing in, of course, and that should be safe. But in the capital world, you need a bit of risk as well. Many like a bit of risk because there's where you can earn the money, at least after working, in the financial sector, something like that. No, but in the future, I think it's important to move the capital. And that is our social obligation to work in the financial market, to move the capital where it gives the highest return. But to able to do that, you need to have the right measure of risk. And without measuring the risk of these climate changes, short-term, like political changes in the mindsets, and also, of course, the longer-term physical changes. I think not taking this into account, I think could actually give you a very or could actually challenge your return on the investment in the long term.
A distorted view.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a little bit more on this. I mean, what is it? I mean, a lot of us are thinking the impact of climate change, we're already signed up for a lot already.
Yeah.
And how do we get more changes to happen when we're not going to know the impact? I'm making this clear.
So it's a cross-sector collaboration, because when you're measuring the risk,
it's not that. It's like
if the feedback link isn't there,
right.
how can we make people realize?
Right,
Yeah.
like the feedback link. The impact of the environment. The delay.
So when you're investing now, you don't see the result before,
so we know what's coming because of the investments or lack of investments that we make. We know what is coming, but
with
then
the environment.
with the environment. But then, for what's after that, we're going to solve those problems. So there are other problems coming. So what do we need to know and hear? What does the community need to know and hear? What does the financial sector need to know and hear?
Yeah. In terms of like the devastation that's potentially coming.
Yeah.
How much do you have to be afraid, and then how much do you have to hope, and then balance them with the feedback loop?
Yes, and that is, because the IPCC report, it comes with a, regular update. And of course it's scary to read that now we have 12 years to do a big change. Otherwise, it's very difficult to reach the 1.5 degree. I think, of course, in the shorter term, you need some kind of feedback to the audience and to investors to see actually that the development is moving forward. I think in the energy sector now, for example, you actually see that things are happening. Look at the cost of producing solar power and wind power. It's been falling rapidly. It's been falling, within the last 7 or 8 years. It's been, the cost has been more than half. Some of them even been falling by 80%. You're starting to see that these kind of projects are competitive without subsidies in many places in the world. And even in the future, you will soon see that the return on these investments are starting to get there without any subsidies. You're seeing the first offshore wind projects being competitive with coal, using competitive with nuclear without subsidies. They're winning the competitions. So these are some signals that we're starting to move in the right directions. You also need to have, I think this, being able to have this microfinancing. You can have small projects to actually give the return to your local community. I think it's important, to build a trust in the system, to build a trust in financing as well, that we could actually do something. We need local small projects you could involve in. I think that is important. Like the project, for example, I read about this, that was a circular project as well. There's a startup, for example, working to collect plastic on the beaches, and then you can return it. It's trying to make a return system, so you could actually use an app to return. You get a payment or some kind of credit points for the plastic you return, and then you can use this money to buy grocery, for example. These kind of small local projects are important, because then you could actually see that there are changes coming. Also, for your city, your local city. For example, when you have new housing and building projects, how could you work together to make it circular, for example? Usually you work in silos, but to be able to work in a circular manner, you need to lift up, you have to work more holistic. So you have to work together with, this company is doing the building, this company is, doing, maybe you have to work with the governance as well, and you have to work with some organizations, but looking at how we could merge or work closer together, maybe even with the competitor, to make these circular way, because then you can improve efficiency, you can cut costs, and you also have a better solution for the climate. So in these kind small local projects, I think it's very important actually to stimulate the optimism and the willingness to do some
So
changes.
the challenges are driving the solutions because there is no one agency who is coordinating all of this effort, and there are multi-sectors coming together to bring around the solution, which is wonderful. So what kind of feedback do people need in a time of over-information? How would you help them know where to go to get the information so that they can be part of this circular solution?
I think I think this small things that if you have a plastic bottle, you can put it in a return system and you get a couple of pence back. It's an easy system, and you can also see that it's not laying there on the ground. It's you're starting to have these small projects where in your local community. I think that helps to see that it's actually working. You could have projects that help women, for example, with we're thinking about. Oh, I can't. I had an example, but I've totally forgot it. Yeah, but
Microfinance for women to start their own businesses.
Yeah,
right?
for example,
Education of children.
especially education is very important, and that is important. I think in this shift as well, because I think if you have these kind of massive shifts, for example, moving from the fossil to the green energy, people have been working in the fossil sectors for ages. Of course, they will feel threatened if they lose their, the jobs. How could the governments and the local communities help people to re-educate, find new places where they could work? Could you find a more sustainable business where they could work? What kind of training do they need? I think these kind of issues are very important to focus on, because then you meet a lot of resistance of doing these kind of changes if people feel threatened, and in these kind of ways supporting the people who has to go through these shifts are important to get the optimism and
I want to ask you a question that I saw one of your articles. You referred to Donald Trump throwing smoke at fire, or the article was about that. So you talk about this optimism and this need to help people retool themselves. What are you seeing the impact of what the voice that Donald Trump is giving? That element of society where it's like climate change doesn't exist, hunker down, me, mine. Talk about that tension you're seeing.
It's frustrating to have such a strong voice talking, against the climate changes, because of course, U.S. is the largest economy in the world with so much power. So it was, without China and the U.S. making this agreement before the Paris Agreement, it would never have happened. And it's so important actually to get a big country such as China, India within this agreement. But then again, you could see if you look at below the surface in the U.S., there are so many things happening there. The technology companies are driving this as well. I think companies such as Tesla, for example, has been so important to change the transportation sector, because the transportation sector were trying to avoid, making these big changes. They wanted to stay within, the fossil world. So what could actually challenge them so much that they have to change? Then you have new companies coming in, challenge them with new technology they haven't, dreamt about, coming in this fast and with this power. So you have these influences coming in and changing the whole market structure. Then you can't resist, or you can't avoid it in a way. And I think the same, trying to avoid the strong voice of Donald Trump as well, showing that this is actually the way to go, showing that this gives you money as well. I think he could agree upon that. The green sectors in the US have actually created a lot of jobs. As soon I think you will have much better return as well. You want to have jobs, you want to have companies with good returns. So making this a business where you could have returns and you can grow, I think it's difficult to say no to these kind of changes in companies.
So business and also public opinion and consumer can actually be pushing government in this case?
I think for sure that, working together, business, the community itself, because politicians have to be re-elected, and there we have the short-termism coming in as well. You have short-termism, of course, within the financial sector, but you also have short-termism, for example, the politicians, they are elected for shorter-term periods. The same with the boards, they're often elected for short-term periods as well. So, but they can't, they can't stop, the development where the public opinion is requiring something, or, the companies are delivering on profit and results within, sustainable solutions.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the way of going forward, showing the good examples and creating jobs within these sectors. So I think the biggest thing we can do within the financial sector is to support these businesses so they can come up and grow and show, return, because then you can't stop them, in my opinion.
So consumerism has a power, the democratization of the whole process, and me as a consumer with my money, I can actually help the process, is what you're saying.
Yes, so consumers, we have the power. Alone, it's difficult to do something, but together we are definitely a strong force. So yes, we have to be careful where we put our money and the products and services we buy. We can require something, and we can require climate-friendly and sustainable solutions.
Perfect. Thank you.